Hi there, welcome back to my channel. This is Shraddha. Today I have had the honor to talk to the USA Today best-selling author Eva Pohler. I had a blast talking to her and I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. And for more such videos, you know the three rules. What are they? Like, share and subscribe. I won't keep you any further. Please continue watching.
Okay.
Please welcome the USA Today best-selling author Eva Pohler. Thank you, Eva, for doing this with me. It's truly an honor. Thank you.
Oh, of course. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Uh, so I have a bunch of questions for you. Will you please answer them?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's start. What inspired you to start writing?
I love to read. From the time I was a little girl, I read constantly. And when I was probably in about the fourth or fifth grade, I had an uncle who sent me his literature anthology from his college class when he had finished it because he knew I loved to read. And I read it from cover to cover, and I fell in love with literature. And I knew that I wanted to somehow be involved in the making of it. And so I studied for years to become a professor of literature, and I taught for almost 30 years. But at the same time, I wanted to make it to write it. And so I just wrote and wrote and wrote, and finally, probably in about 2012, is when that's when I published my first novel, and it was a dream come true, and I've enjoyed my career ever since.
Right. When did you first realize you wanted to be a writer?
I think it was very early. I think it was when I was in the sixth or seventh grade. I started writing short stories, poems. I even created some movie scripts and TV episodes. I was constantly wanting to create. And so I guess I would say it was probably somewhere around middle school.
Huh? Where do you get your information or ideas for your books?
Well, from all over. From one place I get them is from dreams. I get inspired by a dream, and then I do research. I That's my one of my favorite parts of the process. Is to do research. Sometimes I will, if the location of my novel is somewhere in the U.S. that I can easily travel to, then I will go to the location and research it. In fact, this coming week, I'm going to Santa Fe, New Mexico to do a little research for my upcoming novel, The Shade of Santa Fe. But I usually do a lot of research online, and so I get inspired by other art. The inspiration for the very first thing I published, which is Thanatos, came from the movie Meet Joe Black. It starred Anthony Hopkins and Brad Pitt, and it was about death wanting an opportunity to come to the living world and see what it was like to live. And so he made this deal with the Anthony Hopkins character who was about to die. He said, "I'll give you more time to say goodbye to your family and to get your things in order if you will give me an opportunity and sort of teach me what it's like, show me the ropes, basically." It was a great movie. I loved it. But I had so many questions, like who was Death? Where was he coming from? And anyway, I wondered what would have been different about that movie if Death would have been based on Thanatos from the Greek, mythological underworld, and if it would have been geared for young adults, what if, I just had all these what ifs, what ifs, what ifs. So sometimes it's a movie like that that just gets me wondering and asking a bunch of questions. Sometimes it's a dream that I've had, like The Vampires of Athens came from a dream in which a vampire bit me, and his bite infected me with a virus that gave me his powers. And so in my dream, I was flying, I had x-ray vision, I had mind control. It was an amazing dream where I was like so powerful, and I thought, that sounds like it would be a fun book. And so I asked my readers. At the time, I had already written a lot of the underworld saga base. And I asked my readers, because I wasn't doing vampires, I was doing Greek gods. I said, "What do you think about this idea of this?" And they were like, "Oh, write it, write it, write it." So I did, and I kind of incorporated it into my Greek mythology world by making vampires created by maenads, which are these women that follow around the god of wine, Dionysus, and they get their immortality from his wine, but it makes them really ravenous for human flesh or any kind of flesh, rabbits, goats, whatever. And so what they did the very first time he creates his maenads, they go home and they rip apart their families. And so Zeus wants to try to rescue them, but the only thing that will bring them back to life is human blood. And so in my story, The Vampires of Athens, that's where the first vampires are created, is from this experience with the maenads. And so I was able to kind of like bring in my Greek mythology world into this vampire story that I had dreamt about.
That is so wonderful. So, what is your work schedule like when you're writing?
It's very erratic because there are some authors who write at certain times of the day, but I'm not like that. I think about my story a lot. Like when I'm going to sleep, I'll be thinking about the next chapter of the story I'm working on, and then sometimes an idea will just hit me. So I jump out of bed in the middle of the night and I get the idea out. And so, yeah, my sleep schedule's not always great because of that. Uh, I try to write a little bit every day on the story. It's not something that I really have to force myself to do very often because I love it, but there are some times when the deadline is approaching and I just have to force myself to do it. So I do try to write some every day. And I also do spend a lot of time marketing my books. I also enjoy that very much. And so I try to make sure that I split it evenly, that I spend, half my time on the writing and then the other half of my time on the marketing. But the writing phase has several phases. So there's the sort of like the creation of the ideas, which I usually do with a pen in my hand and a spiral notebook, and I sort of outline by creating chapter headings for myself and kind of get a feel for how the story arc is going to go and what the major details, like how what's going to start it, what's going to be like a climactic moment, and then how it's going to end. But then during the first draft writing, it's a pleasant surprise because I'll be writing along my outline and suddenly a new idea hits me. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And, I follow it because that's the fun, is when you're as surprised as a reader would be when something happens, when the characters make this decision that you didn't even foresee. And so a lot of my process is discovery writing, where I'm following a basic outline, but fleshing it out in ways that are very unexpected to me. And so every time I sit down to write, though, I usually go back one or two chapters and I edit, 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 edit. And then I start, writing the new stuff. And a lot of authors think that's a bad idea. They just let that draft come out. They just like sort of vomit it out, and then they go back and do all the revising and everything. But since I taught writing for so many years at a university, I cannot let a draft be imperfect. I have to, it just hurts too much. So I have to go through and make sure that the words, the sentences, the grammar, the punctuation, everything has to be perfect before I can continue. So it slows down my writing process, of course, but by the time I'm done with that draft, it's nearly perfect in terms of, grammar, punctuation. Then I have to send it off to my editor, and she often doesn't, I mean, she finds little things. We all accidentally put a THERE when we meant a THEIR, little things like that. Um, but it's really close to being perfect by the time I'm finished because of that, going back and making it perfect as I go. So that's pretty much the process.
Okay. Do you remember the first story you ever read and the impact it had on you?
I can't remember the very first because my mom used to take us when my sister and I were little, to the public library and check out books. And so we were reading, at a very young age. And I can't really, but I can tell you that the Nancy Drew Mysteries, that was the first series that I fell in love with, and that I had to read every single book that at the time I thought it was a single writer, and then later when I became an adult, I realized that it was a bunch of different writers going under the same name. But every single book in that franchise I had to read. And then not only did I have to read every single one so that I could tick it off my list, I had to go back and reread them. And I just absolutely, and then I wanted to find books that were similar. So I read all the Hardy Boy mysteries, and then there were the Trixie Belden mysteries. And I just, I think it was though that Nancy Drew mystery book is what made me fall in love with reading more than any other book, and what made me want to write like that. I wanted to write those kinds of stories myself.
Uh-huh. What was your favorite book when you were a kid?
I guess it would be one of the Nancy Drew mysteries. I can't really pick it out exactly which one because I love the whole series. But definitely one of those Nancy book mysteries. Now, here's something else though, too. In the fourth and fifth grade, like I said, I devoured all those Nancy Drew mysteries and Hardy Boy mysteries. But by the time I got into middle school, my mom was buying me Harlequin romances, and I don't know if she knew what was inside those books that she was buying me. And so I was like, whoa, I think I read at least 25, 30 Harlequin romance books when I was in middle school, and also fell in love with the romance. So it would be, so I went from reading these sweet, innocent Nancy Drew mysteries to these very steamy Harlequin romances. And then somewhere in there, I was reading this literature anthology, with all these great works like Anton Chekhov, and William Faulkner. And so I was just reading like so many different things. So it's really hard for me to pinpoint a very favorite, but I think as a kid, it would have been Nancy Drew.
Okay. So what do you think makes a good story?
I think the story has to constantly provoke a question. The reader will get bored if the reader isn't made to wonder what is happening, what is going on, being very, very curious. And that's how you lure your readers into the story, is by putting out these little questions to them, where they have to find the answer, or they just can't stop reading. That is the most important to making a story good, is to plant these questions in the reader's mind that they have to have answered, I think.
I agree. Which of your books were the most enjoyable to write?
Now that's like Sophie's choice, that's like asking which is my favorite child. I really, they've all been so enjoyable. From the research and learning new things about a location, learning more about Greek mythology for my Greek mythology books, they've all been such a blast that it's really impossible for me to pick one over another. I can say that some have been easier to write than others, especially those very first books. Those were harder because I was just learning my process. So Thanatos was one of the first books I wrote, and when I look back at it, it took me so many more words to tell that story than it would today, probably, because I wasn't as good a writer, I don't think. And the Purgatorium was another one of those early stories that I wrote, and it took so many years. I mean, I spent probably 5 or 6 years on the Purgatorium. Um, and now I can write a book in probably a month or 2 months. So I think the process has made the joy of writing greater. So probably the more recent books that I've written have been more fun because I know better what I'm doing and I can do it more quickly, whereas those first books that I wrote, it was a very laborious time because I just was still figuring things out.
Okay, now this is something I really want to know. Do you have a favorite character that you have written? If so, who and what makes them so special?
Again, that's like Sophie's choice. You're asking me to pick my favorite child. But I have favorite characters in each series. And so in my Mystery House series, which is a paranormal mystery series geared toward older women more my age, it's kind of like Nancy Drew meets the Golden Girls. So these are sort of like Nancy Drew mystery amateur, they become paranormal investigators. They're what they're trying to do. So they, in their later years, decide they want to start flipping houses, and the very first house they choose is haunted. And so what they have to do is solve this mystery to try to bring peace to the ghosts. And they kind of get addicted to this feeling of joy of bringing this ghost this peace. So then they move on to another house and they solve another mystery, and with each mystery what they're really doing is they're uncovering a true historical injustice that has taken place in that area. And that's part of the fun for me, is researching these injustices. So like the one I'm working on right now, for example, will take place in Santa Fe, and I learned that there used to be a Japanese American internment camp in Santa Fe, and so the ghost is going to have come from there. But anyway, my favorite character in that series is named Sue. She's actually based on a dear friend of mine, but her sense of humor is just so off the wall, out of this world. She just says the craziest things. And so I really enjoy using her in that series for comic relief. So she's one of my favorites. And then in my Underworld series, you read Thanatos. Hypnos is one of my favorite characters. And I originally created him for the same idea, to create this comic relief, to be this sort of flippant character that is very opposite to his brother Thanatos, who is very serious and very somber. But then he sort of took on this whole life of his own. My fans wanted more from Hypnos. They wanted to see more of Hip. And so I ended up writing his own book and giving him an almost equal weight toward the end of the series as Thanatos and Therese. And so he became a favorite as well.
Okay. Who is your favorite Greek god?
That would be Hades, Lord of the Underworld. And one of the reasons why he's my favorite, as I think I mentioned before, I like bringing out injustice. I like in my stories to explore and expose moments of injustice in history. And there's no god that's been more slandered, in my opinion, than Hades, because he's actually a good god, just as good as Poseidon and Zeus, but in so many stories he's portrayed as somehow evil. And I think it's because people have conflated him with the Satan figure from Christianity, and they think of him as like a devil. But he's not a devil or a demon. He's a beautiful God. And he is the only God of his brothers who has been faithful to his wife. And even though the word abduction, the abduction of Persephone is often used to describe the way they met, that word did not mean rape. And a lot of people thought, and they even say the rape of Persephone in some myths, but it wasn't rape like he overpowered her sexually. It was more like he made a deal with back then you just made a deal with the father. The father said, yes, you can have my daughter. And women didn't have a voice in that for, centuries. So it wasn't going against the cultural norms to have just whisked Persephone out of a field and into his chariot and taken her to the underworld. And he was very good to her and faithful to her. And he's even though he might not be the most merciful God in the stories, he is very by the book, and justice is important to him. He is very just, and you can count on him and depend on him to follow the rules. And I just felt, especially after the Disney animation Hercules, I don't know if you ever saw that.
No, I haven't.
Okay, so he's this really cool character with this blue fiery hair, but he is very devil-like. And they make him more like Satan. And I just, as a lover of Greek mythology, even though I enjoyed the film and thought it was funny, I hated the betrayal of him. And so in my work, The Underworld Saga, I made a special effort to sort of defend Hades from this view that he was a devil, by showing his human side and his ability to have compassion, if not mercy, still to have compassion, and to be a very faithful husband and a good father to his children.
Yes, that's super nice. Okay. Do you have a favorite Greek story or myth?
Well, the Hades and Persephone story is the very first that I ever read as a child. I can still remember, even though at age 54, my memory is not very good. Okay, it is not very good. In fact, my children make fun of me. There was a time when we were going to Chinese food restaurants often because all of us love Chinese. And they tell me that there were three different times that I got a Chinese donut and I said, "This looks so good. I wonder what it tastes like." And they were like, "Mom, you said that last weekend." No, I've never tasted this before. Yes, you have. That's how bad my memory is. Okay. In spite of that, I can remember being it must have been the sixth or seventh grade. One of the English teachers had a library, and one of them was of Greek myths. And the very first one I read was Hades and Persephone. And because it was the first, it will always be my favorite because it's what pulled me in and had me reading all of the other myths. I remember we got a little book. Back then we used to order paperbacks through a scholastic book club. So we'd get a little order form that we had to cut out and fill out, and we'd ask our parents for the money. Teachers would collect it and send it off, and then our book would come in like a few weeks later. I ordered Edith Hamilton's Greek mythology book from the Scholastic Book Club and read the thing cover to cover. I still have that book, even though it's almost as old as I am, because I ordered it back when I was like, I don't know, how old would I have been, 12? And the pages are practically falling out and they're so yellow, and I have to be very, very careful when I handle it. But that is what got me into Greek mythology. That first story was Hades and Persephone.
Beautiful. Okay, so what are your favorite novels?
Ah, um, I guess one of my very favorite is The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. If you haven't read it, it was written in the 80s. It's so well done. It's such a beautiful story. And one of the things that I love about it is this author shows us the points of view of these very different characters. And she's able to help us see like the transformation a character goes from their initial impression of someone from a different place with a different culture, and how they come to go from being very kind of like suspicious of this person to loving the person. And I love this idea of helping others to embrace and understand those who are different. That's what makes me love the story. That's probably my very favorite story. But I was a big reader, I still am, of literary fiction. So I read, like, I think one of my favorites is Tracy Chevalier. She's written a bunch of different books that I've read. Like, now I can't even think of their names, goes back to the Chinese donut. The Virgin Blue was one of the first that I read of her that I loved. I think another one was called something like Bright Skies. Just several of those. And then Anne Patchett is another favorite. So those kind of literary stories. And then I also love young adult paranormal romance. And I was a big fan of the Twilight books, a big fan of Cassandra Clare. I've read most of the books that she's written. Um, and let's see. Um, I guess I could go on and mention so many more, but I suppose those are probably my favorites.
Okay, do you like Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte?
Yes. Yes, I love Wuthering Heights. It was very dark, and it's very different. And I remember loving it when I was like in high school, whenever I think I was first introduced to it. And I loved the movie too, even though there were a lot left out. My mother and I used to like to watch it together. Then when I was in I think my 40s, I was part of a book club here in my neighborhood, and we read Wuthering Heights as a book club pick. I didn't like it as an adult. I was like, I loved it so much when I was younger, and now it's just so dark and sad.
That is sad. It makes me feel as if I'm a sadist.
Yeah. Yes.
Uh, so, what book are you currently reading?
Well, I just finished uh reading something, and so I'm kind of in between. I had finished, I was, let's see, I had done a lot of reading of books about the sea because I just released the Pirate Academy, so I had read a lot of things to do with the sea and pirating. I recently read some nonfiction about Santa Fe. Um, and I like listening to audiobooks, and so I started several audiobooks that I didn't finish. I was mainly trying to do some research in my genre to see what some of these famous authors had written, and I don't want to mention their names because I didn't finish and I don't want to, like poo-poo on their books. Um, but they were good, they just weren't enough for me to want to keep going. So I guess I'm sort of in between. And lately I kind of got hooked on this Netflix show, so I was just like, I'm not going to do anything until I finish this show.
What has happened with me? Okay, so who is the author you admire the most in your genre?
Probably Michelle Maddow. She is an indie author, and she has done an excellent job of positioning herself in the young adult fantasy, paranormal, romance. She also has some books that have Greek mythology in them. And she actually came up in the ranks after me, but she was able to do such an amazing job of marketing her books and creating a way that all of these different books are connected. So she has written several different series that are written to market. Like there's a fairy series, there's Greek mythology witches kind of series, there's vampires, there's all and angels. And she is able to do a good job of hitting those tropes with some interesting stories, but yet all those worlds are connected. So I really admire how from the very beginning she was strategic about how she wrote these series. Because for me, when I started, I just sort of started writing what I enjoyed and kind of fumbled into it all. There wasn't like a whole lot of foresight in what I was doing. I just did it. And yet I think she really strategically planned out. And so therefore she's doing very, very well. I thought, man, I wish I would have done things a little more like her. That's for the paranormal, young adult. I also admire Jana DeLeon. She writes mysteries that are geared more, I guess, towards women, older women. And I admire her for the same reason. She seems to have really thought out this brand that she has and has created this entire catalog of books that are really compelling reads and are very easy to identify. When a reader sees them, they know that's a Jana DeLeon book. So for each of those two major genres that I write in, those are the authors that I admire the most.
I have to read them. All
Yes.
right. So, if you had to describe yourself in 3 words, what would they be?
Um, Compassionate is one. I feel like I can feel other people's pain and empathize with them and come to understand them. I feel like that's been one of my strongest characteristics from the time I was young, was the ability to have compassion for other people. I think I'm also a very obsessive person. I tend to, when I want to do something or learn about something, get very obsessed. And in a way, it's been a good thing because it's driven me. I'm very driven. Like when I want to do research for a novel, I just will exhaust everything because I get all obsessed about everything. And when I was saying I'm obsessed, my husband happened to walk in the room and he was nodding his head like, yep, she's obsessed, you know. The third one that I would use is imaginative. And the reason I thought of this word is because we just had a family gathering. My niece just graduated from college, and so we all got together to celebrate that with the family. And I'm the oldest of four siblings, and so it was me and my sister a year apart. Then 10 years later, my mom and dad had two more. And whenever my parents worked in the summer, I was the one that kind of took care of the two younger. And I would make up all of these things because we would just be at home and we were poor. So it wasn't like we had money to get to go and, do a lot of things. I just was the entertainment. And they were talking, my little brother and sister were talking about how I used to create this magic chair where I would sit down with my hands out, my legs out, and they had push a button on my finger and the chair would do these different things. And then I created this magic tree where they could climb me and and then I also created this world in our backyard where we were farmers and we had all these animals like horses and chickens and pigs and we had all these chores we had to do and I was all and we then we, my little sister was saying, remember when you would take us to the park and there were these logs that we had to walk on and if we fell there were alligators. I mean, I was always creating these worlds for my little brother and sister and they loved joining me in these worlds. And I think that it was the kind of the seed for me to become a writer because that's kind of what I'm doing as a writer is I'm creating these worlds. It's like I'm a kid and I'm the one in charge of the game and I'm creating these worlds and my readers are like the friends that are playing along in the world with me or my little brother and sister, they're playing. So those are the three words that I think imaginative, obsessive, and compassionate.
You were an amazing sister. I have a sister, she's 2 years younger than me, and I'm not as creative as you. She probably gets bored. Okay, finally, any message you would like to give your readers?
Yes, I would like to say thank you because there really isn't a writer without readers. I mean, you could write for yourself, but it's truly not the same as when you know that there are people waiting to read your book and responding to the book. I love it when a new book comes out and my readers post. I have a little readers group on Facebook called the Polar Bear Lounge. In fact, if you haven't joined, you might want to. I think you did though recently, or maybe that was, yeah. And so we sometimes talk about the books after they've been out for a little while. And I love that because my family gets tired of me always talking about my books. And, it's nice to have these readers who want to talk about them. And so I want to say thank you. That's my message is thank you for reading my books. Thank you for talking to me about my books, for letting me know that you enjoyed them, how they impacted you. I get emails and messages from people, either email or Facebook Messenger, like people maybe who have been sick and who they have been bedridden and my books have helped them through a difficult time. And that just I cannot tell you how much pleasure that gives me, how much joy to know that the little stories that I've created, these little worlds that have made people so happy. It's kind of like my brother and sister all over again telling me, "Oh, you made those summers so much better by creating these games for us to play."
Thanks a lot, Eva, for doing this. It's truly an honor, and I'm so grateful to talk to you. And I had a great time. Thanks a lot.
Me
Thank
too. Thank you so much for having me. You have a great day.
you. Time talking to her. I actually learned a lot while talking to her, and you will also realize that when you're listening to her, she teaches us so much, and she's such an open-minded person that I was so impressed, and I actually admire her for that. The way she tells how she broke the stereotypes about Hades and all. I fell in love with her, and it was such an amazing time. Please read her book Thanatos. It's an amazing read. It's actually that's the first book I've read, and she's having a whole lot of series. She writes different genres, and all of them are equally amazing and interesting. The links to all her books will be down below in the description box, so do not forget to grab them. This was it. I'll see you guys stop coming videos. Till then, please keep reading.